Are you Mr. William Stafford? Yes, but, well, it was yesterday. Sunlight used to follow my hand. And that's when the strange siren-like sound flooded over the horizon and rushed through the streets of our town. That's when sunlight came from behind a rock and began to follow my hand. It's for the best, my mother said. Nothing can ever be wrong for anyone truly good. So later, the sun settled back and the sound faded and was gone. All along the streets, every house waited, white, blue, gray. Trees were still trying to arch as far as they could. You can't tell when strange things with meaning will happen. I'm still here writing it down just the way it was. You don't have to prove anything, my mother said. Just be ready for what God sends. I listened and put my hand out in the sun again. It was all easy. Well, it was yesterday, and the sun came. Why, it came. Taking a comfortable seat with your knees at a right angle and your feet flat. And your hands resting upward on your lap. And just feeling everything slow down. Your breath, your thoughts. Just checking it all into neutral, like William Stafford used to say about the writing process. And then letting your shoulders fall. And letting your chest soften and open. Letting it be more of what it already is somewhere. Softening the belly. And relaxing all the muscles of your face, around the eyes, the forehead, and your jawbone, around your mouth. Maybe stretching from side to side as far as feels comfortable and no more. Your neck just a little bit to the right and a little bit to the left. So you feel that soften too. Just placing yourself in a pose of receiving. You don't have to prove anything, my mother said. Just be ready for what God sends. He says, I listened and put my hand out in the sun again. It was easy. Now, in that state of repose, just lengthen the breath a little bit. 4 counts in. 5 counts out. 4 counts in and pausing just a little bit at the top. And 5 counts out. You don't have to prove anything. Just be ready for what God sends, however that means to you. Whether we call it non-attachment or receptivity. Just 2 more breaths. Pause at the top. Are you Mr. William Stafford? Are you Mr. William Stafford? Yes, but, well, it was yesterday. Sunlight used to follow my hand. And that's when the strange siren-like sound flooded over the horizon and rushed through the streets of our town. That's when sunlight came from behind a rock and began to follow my hand. It's for the best, my mother said. Nothing can ever be wrong for anyone truly good. So later, the sun settled back and the sound faded and was gone. All along the streets, every house waited, white, blue, gray. Trees were still trying to arch as far as they could. You can't tell when strange things with meaning will happen. I'm still here writing it down just the way it was. You don't have to prove anything, my mother said. Just be ready for what God sends. I listened and put my hand out in the sun again. It was all easy. Well, it was yesterday and the sun came. Why, it came. I'll say a little bit about William Stafford and his writing practice in a moment, but this poem is so beautiful to me because it comes at, whether he knew it or not, an urgent moment in his life, and yet it's got the sweetest, calmest, most present, most relaxed quality to it, more so even than other of his poems that I know and love. There's an air raid siren in it, and at the same time, the light is speaking to him. He puts out his hand and the light follows his hand. And for him, it's about writing it down, just the same as always, just sitting here and showing up and writing it down. And the light arrives and it follows his hand. It's a strange thing with meaning that arrives when opposites like that siren and the light attain a kind of vertiginous closeness, Milan Kundera says, a vertiginous closeness that makes us dizzy with awe. And that's when the strange things with meaning happen. I thought of this poem because I was taking a walk on Wednesday with my friend Michael Brenner, who runs the Center for Israeli Studies on campus, a very difficult job in the last year for him. And he told me a story about his life that I'd never heard before. His father had been in several concentration camps during World War II. He was born in Poland, I think now Ukraine. His mother was born in Dresden and grew up there and was slotted to leave for Auschwitz-Birkenau. And he said her day to leave for Auschwitz-Birkenau was February 13th, 1945. And I said, was she in the Dresden bombing? And he said, it saved her life. The Dresden bombing saved her life. And I realized as I was walking here with this man that he would not exist if it weren't for the Dresden bombing. So these moments where meaningful things happen out of that vertiginous closeness of, is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? The Dresden bombing, Michael's existence. For Michael, it must be an incredible feeling of vertiginous awareness and awe that his life would not be without the pain of that moment. And out of that comes this appreciation that we can't know the good or the bad. That highness of the vertiginous feeling rises above good and bad into a place where we're just receptive for what God sends. And it's a very difficult thing, I know, especially now with the weeks that are approaching, wanting to put our hands out in order to manipulate the world, which we do and we try. But there's also a time when your ballot is cast to just sit back with your hands open and receive what comes. Yeats called that a terrible beauty in his poem, April 1916. He says, a terrible beauty is born. And the writer Han Gang, who just won the Nobel Prize, wrote a book called The White Book, in which she imagines a moment in her mother's life when her sister was born and had a moment of life, opened her eyes, and then died. And as a result of that death, her mother tried to have another child, and it was Han Gang. And she's writing this in Warsaw, and she's seeing in Warsaw all of these buildings built on top of other buildings that had been destroyed and decimated during the war. And these buildings are artificial replications of the original Warsaw. So she's thinking about the real Warsaw underneath the artificial Warsaw. And she's thinking about the sister underneath her, the replacement. And she does this beautiful thing where she offers the sister who has no language and who had only a moment of sight in the world. She offers the sister her eyes, and she offers the sister her breath to breathe in her and to see through her, which is all that she could do, the best that she could do. So as I said, this was William Stafford's final poem in 1993. And here it is, Kim Stafford, a kind of saint of his father's memory, preserved this page, and it appears on the inset of Stafford's selected poems. This is the poem that he wrote on the 28th of August, 1993, the day that he died. Stafford's process was to write every day, so similar to Rosemary Watola-Trommer. He was a conscientious objector in the war. He was born in Kansas in 1914, so he was He was still pretty young, but not a kid when the war happened. And he was sent into the civilian public service camps, something I talked about last year when we did another of his poems. And he worked on soil conservation, which I think is a wonderful thing. His life was about being connected to the land, being connected to the source of our nourishment. So I love it that he worked in the forests and for the soil. And then from 1954, he taught in Oregon, and he lived an ordinary, simple existence at the same time, being a kind of superstar, going around and giving thousands of readings, being famous for his ubiquitousness in the poetry world. His sayings from those readings and his answers to questions are contained in a wonderful book called The Answers Are Inside the Mountains, which was published after his death, 10 years after, in 2003. So here's the poem one more time. And I just want to think about putting out our hands in the skill of turning towards what happens rather than away. Are you Mr. William Stafford? Are you Mr. William Stafford? Yes, but, well, it was yesterday. Sunlight used to follow my hand. And that's when the strange siren-like sound flooded over the horizon and rushed through the streets of our town. That's when sunlight came from behind a rock and began to follow my hand. It's for the best, my mother said. Nothing can ever be wrong for anyone truly good. So later the sun settled back and the sound faded and was gone. All along the streets, every house waited. White, blue, gray, trees were still trying to arch as far as they could. You can't tell when strange things with meaning will happen. I'm still here, writing it down just the way it was. You don't have to prove anything, my mother said. Just be ready for what God sends. I listened and put my hand out in the sun again. It was all easy. Well, it was yesterday. And the sun came. Why, it came. So taking that comfortable seat again. And putting out your hand. Resting your hands on top of your lap in that pose of receptivity. For some of us, we just show up at a writing desk and we wait and see. And the sun appears from behind the rock, metaphorically, and it follows our hands. Someone else might show up in their studio making art every day, like my friend Jim Youngerman. Every day. And the light follows his hand. Or on the cushion, or in a garden, or for a spouse. And the light follows your hand. putting your awareness between your eyebrows. Feeling that concentration there and that focus. Just turn your mind's eye toward that beauty in your life that is terrible and wonderful. Bruce Weigel says that going to Vietnam crushed him, but it made him a poet. And it woke him up. That wasn't the intention, but that's what happened. Lengthening the breath. Four counts in, five counts out. Maybe practicing the way Hung Gong did, offering your breath for someone else who can enjoy that feeling like you can, or your eyes for someone else. How much of what comes to us we think by chance is really just coming to us because we offered ourselves to the world. How much of the best of what comes to us is because we turn toward the terrible beauty instead of turning away. Just quieting everything and feeling that beam going from the heart to that point in the forehead. Having planted those seeds and those questions, not trying to answer them. Just feeling the whole tree go to stillness. Every leaf, Here's something Stafford says in his book, The Answer is Inside the Mountain. What a person is shows up in what a person does. And that way, isness is the Warsaw underneath the Warsaw of action. If you know what I mean. Our reaching out is really a second Warsaw. And underneath it is this isness. It's the soil, the source of all of our doing. Why not work on that? What a person is shows up in what a person does. Just one more minute. Staying with that offering of eyes and breath. What a person is shows up in what a person does, not in what happens, but in what a person does. Are you Mr. William Stafford? Are you Mr. William Stafford? Yes, but, well, it was yesterday. Sunlight used to follow my hand. And that's when the strange siren-like sound flooded over the horizon and rushed through the streets of our town. That's when sunlight came from behind a rock and began to follow my hand. It's all for the best, my mother said. Nothing can ever be wrong for anyone truly good. So later the sun settled back and the sound faded and was gone. All along the streets, every house waited, white, blue, gray. Trees were still trying to arch as far as they could. You can't tell when strange things with meaning will happen. I'm still here writing it down, just the way it was. You don't have to prove anything, my mother said. Just be ready for what God sends. I listened and put my hand out in the sun again. It was all easy. Well, it was yesterday, and the sun came. Why, it came. Thank you so much, everyone. Grace, I wondered, did you interview William Stafford?
I did. I saw him in 1968 when he came to DC. And yes, he was he taught us everything, didn't he, David? And now you're teaching us everything. Thank you so much, David. We love you.
I love you.
I'm going to be interviewing Judith Bowles next month.
Aha, who is here, I think.
Right here.
Grace,
Yes.
so happy. And I was getting my MFA at American University when he came. And I was in fiction, but I came to all his classes, and I will never forget his presence.
True, so true.
Just to be with him was an event.
David, did you know him?
I never got to know him. I was in graduate school when he passed away, and I had never heard him read, never got to meet him, but he's been a
Oh,
huge influence for me.
well, we were born too soon, and that's why we got to know him.
That was a good event. Born when we were.
Born too soon. Thank you, darling David.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you all.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much.